am all about facts, you know that. I don't
Do you believe that, yes or no?
Excuse me, I like facts.
A kind of word salad of scientific jargon.
What? I like facts.
You're in the cult, bro! You are who we're at war with!
The scary monster of which I speak?
A small handful of people
who believe in truth with facts.
I'll go there with you all day.
Well, there's a lot to argue about in this world. And sometimes it seems like the most important arguments are the least likely to end anytime soon. God or no God, capitalism, socialism, GIF or GIF. Now, usually when you're arguing with someone about one of these things, you do assume that one or the other of you is in fact right. Usually you assume that's you, and maybe you are, and maybe you aren't. But there is also a third possibility, which perhaps you have not considered. This is the possibility that you're right and wrong, and they're wrong and right, and also neither of you are either right or wrong, and at the same time you're both right and wrong and neither about the same thing. For in the case of some arguments, you may find that the principles from which you proceed can lead both to your own conclusion and at the same time to the exact opposite of what you were each trying to argue about in the first place. The same is true for whomever you're arguing with. Take, for instance, the old argument between whether the world is ultimately spiritual or physical in nature, idealism versus materialism, as they call it in philosophy class. Say the soul does not exist, and it's all mere matter, and all our thoughts and feelings are a part that follows after, a product of neurons' atomic transfer, a stimulus responding but not a conscious answer. And consciousness at its noblest is just the total synthesis of ultimately physical, infinitesimal little bits, which eventually flicker and switch off in impotence, and so the consciousness they constitute is without all significance. That would be the materialist viewpoint. But your feelings are real, and it's real that you're hearing this, and such self-reflection is just what soul and spirit is, and so those physical processes that cause us our fear and bliss produce non-physical phenomena that clearly exist. And so matter is inclusive of the principle it's thought to miss, that is, it has a capacity for conscious intelligence. And if you're willing to admit that matter can be conscious, you admit that it includes that which it's defined in contrast to. So yeah. Or, say there's no matter, and it's all spirit and soul, and objects that have mass that your hand appears to hold are in fact a vast interplay of images that are really no more real than mere dreams, and we're what makes the dreams go. And we too may be dreams of a singular supersoul, and all these dreams' purpose is to see through to its truth and goal, and that which appears to be an inanimate wad of mere stuff is, weird enough, actually God. Like when you're on drugs. But all dreams aside, what happens a lot is that I freeze when I'm cold and I burn when I'm hot. And if right now I ate shit and dropped here on this spot, then the floor would make it clear that an illusion it's not. And if I was to define even the clearest sensations as an illusion, then who even am I and what am I doing? And whom could I ask that if I, as the asker, were not separated from you by our matter? Well, here's a possible answer. It's this and that, and both, and neither, and it's a fact, so don't believe it. It's not sense or nonsense, so all that leaves is a process through contrasting possibilities. Wherever that leads, whatever that means, whomever that includes, and that includes you and me. It is what it isn't, and isn't what it seems, so don't be sure and don't be mean. Here's another example from the domain of political discourse. Say you're a radical progressive, generally defined. You think the pre-existing structures should be left behind. We must tear down these systems and then free the mind from the old guard's traditions that hold it in line. And there's no truth to teach. One seeks, but there isn't, though, and therefore we should teach to be creative and critical, because in the absence of any other overarching purpose in the universe, there's just the individual freedom of persons. But isn't this very relativistic reassessment itself but an expression of a biased entrenchment? Aren't the very critiques that lead us in a better direction themselves all subjective and subject to convention? And if all absolutes are just inducements of oppression, is anti-absolutism itself exempt from its own objection? And doesn't centering ourselves around our self-invention just subject us to yet another centralized conception? It's a good question. Or you're a radical conservative, economically and socially, and you assert there's a way things are and are not supposed to be, which means what's yours is yours and what's mine is only owned by me, and you oppose those whose ideas oppose this openly. And the reason we find ourselves in weird situations is we're drawing new lines that aren't clear in their placement, as people try to veer from the way that nature made them, and this leads to society's deterioration. But if you find yourself saying there's such a thing as nature that has a fixed form as defined by its creator, wouldn't every strange form he's made lately or still hasn't yet still be an expression of his will and that naturalness? And if God is absolute, omniscient, and omnipotent, then he also made revolutions, even if you're not into it. And it follows from his omnipotence, omniscience, and absoluteness that his nature would include both the old school and the new shit. But the truth of it is, It's this and that, and both, and neither. You don't know shit, you're not wrong either. Don't be a believer, but also don't assert that there's nothing to believe in, and don't be a jerk. It's absurd to say the facts are certain and exact, and absurd to assert that there's alternative facts. It is what it isn't, but be it as it is. It's neither and both, and that, and this. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just rhyming while doing it. Wise in my foolishness, blind in my foolish wit. I've been trying to find the truth and I'm behind in pursuit of it, but I might yet find it precisely in losing it. But what good does that do? And isn't what I'm muttering just an abstract distraction from the actual suffering of the persons and facts and the passion of utter being? Yes, perhaps. That and this other thing. Be nice.